Here's how I turn this blank graph into an artistic masterpiece. The base of my logo is the circle. To save space in equations, I got rid of this R slider and replaced it with just any number. The main problem I had with this circle is that it was too small, so I made it bigger. Pretty much all I did when trying to make it bigger was fiddle around with the values at the front of the numbers until I got a shape that I felt was right. As well as this, I want it to be a fishbowl, so I have to cut the top out so the fish can breathe properly. For that, I just did 2.5, which is a nice number. That was my y. So that means everything under 2.5, I accept. The next thing I made was the fish. The fish, I used two parabolas. The first was a positive, and the second was a negative. I moved the minimum parabola down, and I got a pretty nice looking fish. What I didn't like about it was that it was very, very narrow. Using my knowledge of parabolas, and that increasing the number makes it tighter, I decided to decrease to 0.3. Seemed right. I just fiddled around until I got a shape I liked the most. But I didn't like it like this, so instead I wrote it out as a shaded in area to save me from specifically picking where I want to cut it off at. This worked really well, but I couldn't get the tail in one equation. So now, to get the tail, I used pretty much the same equation, only I rearranged it slightly. And that gave me the ends of the parabola. Also what I did is I limited it. So that means I made the x equal less than 0. And it doesn't really matter what value I put here, since everything past this point doesn't really matter. And then I also cut it off at minus 2.5. Just give me that nice tail look. The next thing I did was I looked at my circle and I thought, my fish is pretty out of sync. It seems squashed at the back. So I went back over to my circle and I moved it a little bit. What I found out, mainly from asking around, is that putting brackets and adding specific numbers at the front of these moved the circle. What I found that helped me the most was that putting a number over here moved my circle just too much. So 0.5, 0.4, 0.4. That's the best. The next thing I wanted to do was add some water for my fish before it died. I did this by using Cyan. This was actually inspiration from Gavin. Thank you, Gavin. Shout out, Gavin. Please give Gavin more marks. It worked really well, but my fish was a little bit dry in some areas. I found that putting numbers in front of the X worked really well through trial and error. As you can see, 2 worked really well, maybe 3. And just the frequency of waves. I started with 2. Also wanted to be stretched out a little bit more. So I found that, less powerful waves, I mean. So I found that increasing the values increase the power of the wave. So I found that doing a decimal worked very well. So I used 0.3. Also, I found that my fish was still very low in the water. He was struggling to live. And I found that adding numbers out the front were perfect. One was a bit too much for me. I was going to drown. So I was settled with 0.5, 0.7. 5.7. Next, I looked at my wave and thought that it really didn't suit. Came out all the way over here and didn't fill my fish tank at all. So I decided to make it a shaded in area again, just so it's easier and it didn't have to mess around with how close it was to the crossing, to the intersection. I did this by plugging in my circle shape, my circle formula, and that filled my circle completely. And then I limited it so that would be the same value as this, as my sign line. This goes on the outside, and this one goes exactly where I want it to be. So now, boom. Next, I wanted my police fish to have eyesight. So I blessed him with vision, like Jesus. I found out a good equation for a square using the internet. And that's perfect. Again, by messing around with the values and stuff, I found that putting numbers at the front actually lengthened and stretched and did cool things to my square. It's pretty interesting. Said it was 7 for both. That's a pretty good fish eye size, I'd say so. I'm not a fish eye doctor, but I feel like a fish with an eye like this would be a very healthy eyed fish. By this equation, it actually had an inverse relationship, or not inverse, but like it always went to the 1. -1 went to +1. -1 went to +1. So I changed my y, and that went right where I wanted it to be, in the eye of my fish. And actually coming back to this just a little bit ago, I can make it blink. Yeah. Anyway, back to the video. Next, just to complete the fish, I added a very important straight line. This is just a normal straight line, but I want it to equal 2.5 negative. So we just come in line with the tail of my fish and just enclose it. What I did, I just simply cut it off. And that's my fish done. And now to make it a police fish. To make it a police fish, I actually used a cubic function. So here's my cube. Here's my square. Here's my x. And plus b, plus c, whatever you want to do. So with this, I found out that mainly by trial and error, adding numbers at the front changed the look of the thing in different ways. Found that the 3x worked very well, especially when it was a negative. It pushed it down just to where I wanted it to be. And what I did want it to be was sit it right on top of the fish, as like those police sirens you see on top of those cars in movies. The next thing I did was make this x a negative, just to emphasize that in the middle pretty much. Was that using my knowledge, my very, very smart knowledge. I know that this, using my knowledge, my very, very smart knowledge, I know that this is the y-intercept. So if I raise that y-intercept to like 0.5, it will sit at exactly where I want it to be. So very smart. And then I didn't really like how this looked though, since I'd had to cut it unevenly here, which at the moment I don't know how to do. So I used my maximum parabola formula, this one, and I put it here. And I did something just like this. This perfectly fit what I really wanted to do, but it had all this extra part where the parabola had cut off, as you can see. And then wherever the parabola is, that's where all the parabola is, and it was letting all of this stuff in. So, very simply, two is just easy. Nothing was in the way. Perfect. Probably the most important part is the actual siren. So we have the siren, but we need some of the lights coming out. So with this, I actually use the anyway, yeah, this is just the basic one. Pretty simple. It looks pretty nice. What I actually did though is change the 1 to a 0, and that just made it that nice, straight, shining light that I wanted. What I did again is I slightly moved it. I didn't want to right in the center, but I wanted it kind of beaming out of the siren. So I put numbers at the front of the X, or applying to the X, and that moved it. The next thing I did was actually shrink the Y. So I found that much like parabola, it shrinks or it gets less steep. So I wanted more of a beam than this ray, I guess. Anyway, so I added a 5 simples. The next thing I did do is just a 1. Add a 1. Take away a 1 just to move it up. So again, inverse effect, I guess. And then after that, quickly just limited it to about here. So that cuts off anything behind x.1, which is nice. And then I cut it off again at 2. Like I don't want to blind everyone, just so you know I'm coming, I guess. The last step, not that last step, but quality of life step is I went through and recolored all of these. Lastly, turn off the grid, excess number. You know what is actually cool about this? You can do lots of cool things, add arrows, yeah. An optional option that I optionally did was I added Lenny from Shark Tale, just to show my fish in the workplace doing his job and everything is working very well. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you want more videos like this, you should assign me more videos. I did have lots of fun making the logo itself. I think more fun making the video though. Anyway, thank you.